Catapulting Commissions family. What's up, team? Welcome back to this week's episode of the Catapulting Commissions podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Garcia. Look, we are traveling the world. We are traveling the country. We are finding the best sales professionals and sales leaders to come join us and talk about what they're doing to accelerate their results, to catapult their commissions, to overall grow in the direction we all want to grow. If you've been following the show over the past 100 episodes, you've realized we took a brief 3-week break, and we appreciate you doing that. And during that 3-week break, we had to do some regrouping, picking up some main guests coming back on the show. And with all honesty, it was a structured, settled break between myself and my production team. So we are glad you're back with us for season 2 of the Catapulting Commission Show. Our guest today is Raphael Collazo. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Raphael. Raphael is a commercial real estate agent. He is out of Louisville, Kentucky. He works with the Garcia group. Just to give you a little bit of the success that Raphael's had. He's put 350 million transactions sold in 6 states. His group has 30 years combined experience in the real estate industry. He is the author of Before You Sign That Lease. And what I want to find out from Raphael is how he's built his business when he launched in one of the most challenging, quote unquote, pandemic times. We're going to dive into that. So, Raphael, welcome to the Catapulting Commission Show.
Thanks for having me, man. It's really great to be here.
I'm glad to have you here, brother. So let's jump into this. So there's so many directions I want to go with you on this before you sign that lease, but I got to ask you this question, right? You're in commercial real estate. You launched your career in commercial real estate 9 months before, quote unquote, this pandemic hits. Walk us through your first 12 months. I mean, what were your expectations? How has the pandemic impacted your business, and how have you pivoted to retain producing results at a high level?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. So prior to joining commercial real estate, I actually was in a completely different career field. I studied engineering in college and got into software consulting. So I worked at a company that implemented software systems for government agencies, and I traveled around the country and abroad. I was in D.C. for several years, Puerto Rico, and then eventually moved to Louisville, Kentucky back in 2018 or 2017 after Hurricane Maria. Transitioned away from doing that into commercial real estate in mid of 2019. I really didn't know what to expect. You know, I'd never been in a sales role before, and I knew that in order for me to really have success, I would have to produce at some point with consistent action. And so over the course of the first 6 months or so, it was a lot of, cold calling, interacting with people, trying to just get my name out there as best as I could. And I started building some momentum, early 2020, and then the pandemic hit. So I had several people that I was working with that, just decided to hold off because it was so, at the time, we didn't know what was happening. Like no business owner really knew how this pandemic was going to affect their business. There really hadn't been a lot of effort on the government's part in order to say, hey, we're going to be able to smooth some of this out through some of the loan programs that they offered. And so a lot of my business and investor clients just kind of stopped. So for 2 months there, I had almost no activity. And so what I realized is that I needed to be able to transition and pivot online. And so I started incorporating an online strategy through YouTube videos. I also run a commercial real estate and investment meetup called the Commercial Real Estate 101. We talk about different commercial real estate topics, and I started advertising heavily on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn group now that has almost 600 members, and every month every other week we interview people from different parts of the country, and we have solid engagement on that front. And then like heavily advertising online, and by the time we started getting back out there as a society, people started recognizing who I was. They knew I was affiliated with commercial real estate, and things started to take off a little bit from there. And by no means am I like the top producer in the market, but I've definitely gotten to a point now where I'm starting to see some results, and hopefully the sky's the limit from there.
Well, one, I want to acknowledge, you made a strong pivot. 2, I love the background, which goes to show, right? There's no ideal background for salespeople. I hate when I hear people like, oh, I have the ideal background for salespeople. I gotta be honest, man. I have school teachers that I know are killer salespeople. I have trash truck drivers that I know are killer salespeople. It doesn't matter the background. It's the work effort you put in, which you just laid out a strong work ethic. But you laid out something that, let's be honest here. You built a personal brand. That's what it is. You're selling your services, but you're really building that brand. Like YouTube video or YouTube group, LinkedIn group, did some like where did someone teach you this, or you're just like, hey, I need to make a pivot, I need to see what the best direction is, and what is that goal? Because you're building your brand. And so there's somebody listening right now that's saying, okay, my industry's been impacted, I need to kind of have that pivot as well. What would you tell that person on how to build that brand that is not always the, because what you didn't say was, hey, I picked up the phone and I called my prospects 100 times, like, hey, you ready to do business today? You ready to do business today? That old die hard, follow up a million times, close business. I mean, that shit is horrible. But you definitely have something that's worth talking about. So let's hear about that.
Yeah, sure, and I definitely don't want to discredit that as a strategy, because it does work. I know plenty of people that are doing that and having a lot of success doing so. So it definitely can be an effective strategy. As far as more of evergreen content, it's my logic was this. It said, look, it's going to take a while to build a personal brand, and that's one common misconception a lot of people face, is that they put out a ton of effort to create all these videos and podcast episodes and whatever else, and they don't see immediate results, and then they stop. And that's really the problem. And what you've been able to do with 100 episodes, I mean, you could see the growth over time. I'm sure when you first started producing the podcast, I mean, you probably weren't getting a significant amount of downloads, but over time, the algorithm works and people start listening to it, people start reviewing, and people start to know you. That's when the results start happening. So first and foremost, it's about consistent action. And what I would recommend as far as an online strategy is concerned, I took the position that video content was of value to me. The reason why I think it's extremely valuable, especially YouTube in particular, is because there's different senses that are engaged, right? You have the audio sense and you also have a visual sense. And so what you think about it, whenever you're interacting with a client or a potential client, they have to know, like, and trust you, right? So in order for them to really learn to trust you, having a video of you explaining a topic or interviewing someone, you can read their personality, you can read, different things about them, so that, if they watch one or two or three of your videos, if they decide to engage with you or you run into them somewhere in other social settings, they feel like they already know you. So that barrier, which is one of the hardest parts about being in sales, is that, a lot of times there's an initial trust factor that's not established. But if you have a video content that you've produced, if you have books or you have other things out there, it helps lower that barrier a bit. So you can start building rapport a little bit more effectively. And then, obviously you have to execute at the end of the day. But, I think, again, personal branding takes time. And what I would recommend people do is pick a strategy. It doesn't have to be everything, and just stick with it for a long period of time.
Yeah, you hear that. I love how you said it, right? Pick the strategy, stick with it for a long piece of time. Yeah, I hear people that want to create content. It's so much so that, I mean, I see people within my feed that I personally know that want to create content for whatever industry they're in, and they do it for 3 weeks, they do it for a month, and they're like, oh, it's not getting the results. And I've joked with people, I'm like, okay, well, do you think your first piece of content is going to be at Gary Vaynerchuk status? Like, you don't realize the guy's been doing this for over 10 years and was started with Wine Library and was doing videos. And I agree. I mean, it's funny. Thank you for acknowledging the 100 episodes. I joked with people. My very first episode had 7 downloads, 7, and I'm pretty sure I was like 4 of them. So I was like, holy crap, dude! There's nobody listening to my show. So I know what that feels like. But I want to kind of piggyback on that. So you're building a brand. Raphael, you've been in commercial real estate, let's say less than 3 years, but you're an expert in your field right now and you're building your brand. You ever struggle with imposter syndrome?
All the time, for sure. I mean, especially when you're dealing in an environment where a lot of times your prospects are much older than you.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I, somewhat struggle with at times. A lot of the people that I deal with are experienced business owners and investors, and they've been around the block a lot. And so sometimes coming in the interaction and really having to show them that you are in fact an expert can make you feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. However, I think it's important to note that if you're committed to the industry and you learn and grow and expand your knowledge each and every day, I read industry publications every day. I've taken the necessary coursework via CCIM and various other mediums. So I over time, you start learning things. And a lot of times, all you need to do is be a little bit more knowledgeable and a little bit more of an expert than your client. And if you are, then that's where you can add value, because you can say, oh, well, in this situation, I would do this. And your client may have not thought of it that way. And so Again, all you need to be is a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more of an expert than your client, and then you start adding exponential type of value. And obviously, as you close more and more transactions, you start having that experience that people who are sales professionals in the industry for decades have. Then you can add even more value. But you're right. I mean, imposter syndrome is unavoidable. It's just be an expert by consistently learn and be committed to the industry.
Catapulting Commissions family, we hear Raphael saying there is being that expert, your confidence draws in knowing your product, your system, your process, whatever it is, right? In Raphael's situation, it's commercial real estate. For you, it could be e-commerce sales. For you, it could be traditional real estate. For you, it could be car sales. Whatever the situation is, if you have prepared and you know more about the subject at hand than your ideal customer, then you are the expert, and it draws that confidence from you. And I'm glad to hear you say, you struggle. Imposter syndrome hits you. Imposter syndrome hits me. I know the clients that I work with, they struggle sometimes. Like, oh, I got imposter syndrome. No one's listening to me. Who am I? And I'm always like, who are you not to? But when you're creating content, right? And you go into the strategy and you're using your content and you're using your really just like an education based platform to build your brand. There's someone listening right now that says, hey, I want to do what you're doing, Raphael. I sell agriculture, right? So I live in the Central Valley of California. We're really agriculture based. I sell agricultural sales, right? I don't know if this method applies for me, or I don't know if I can put content out there, or I'm not good in front of camera, right? And people see guys like you and me, like, oh, you guys are talking, like you guys. I don't know for you, but this wasn't natural for me in the beginning. So can you walk us through that journey of that person that, or what would you have to say to that person that says, I want to do what you're doing. I'm afraid I don't know what message I have to say. I'm not comfortable in front of camera. No one's going to listen. All these fears that people have before they even start.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I mean, think about a time that you tried something that you had never done before. You're naturally not going to be good at it. It doesn't matter if you, quote unquote, have a natural ability or whatever. You're not going to be as good as you would be if you consistently do it over a long period of time. So as far as creating content via YouTube, I started out back in 2017 just creating videos unrelated to commercial real estate. At the time, I was working in another industry, and the videos that I was creating was related to personal development, and I'd written a blog about personal development. But that's where it started. And not only that, I also joined an organization called Toastmasters, which is a public speaking and leadership organization. They meet on a weekly, sometimes bi-monthly basis, and you practice giving speeches in front of people. And there's sections for impromptu speaking where people just ask you a question and you have to think on your feet. After being part of that organization for over 5 years, you become very, very effective as a communicator. So, that could be something that you consider, especially if you want to start creating some video content. Go to a Toastmasters meeting, become engaged as a member, and then over time, year 2, 3, again, it's a slow process. You eventually become a very, very effective communicator, and that translates to camera. But let's say that you're not necessarily, natural in front of the camera, and you really don't want to do that. Maybe you're a great writer. Start writing blog posts. If maybe write a book. There's so many different ways to create content. So I definitely don't want to pigeonhole someone and say you have to do everything on YouTube. There's a lot of people who are just doing stuff on LinkedIn, and they're killing it on LinkedIn. Like that's all they do. They don't really produce a lot of video content, but they just know how to structure posts very well. They know how to engage people on the platform, and they're getting super significant engagement. So again, pick your poison and stick with it for a long period of time.
Yeah, I love that. And if you are picking that poison, let's not discredit. Raphael, I have 2 daughters that are 12 years old. I'm gonna be honest with you. I need to up my TikTok game. I need to up this. It's not where my client avatar is hanging out right now, but in 5 years, I mean, if TikTok's still there, but whatever it is, pick your poison and run with it. Because there are, I read an article recently on a shoe guy who creates custom pieces of shoe painting. His only method of promoting his shoes is TikTok. I mean, genius, right? You're wherever you're at. But yeah, LinkedIn, YouTube, audio, blogs. I love it. You pick your poison, you run with that. You mentioned books. Let's talk a little bit about your book. So you have a book before you sign that lease. What's the premise behind the book?
So the book itself is a comprehensive guide to leasing commercial real estate. I didn't really see a lot of content out there pertaining to really the process of leasing, purchasing, or selling commercial real estate. And my goal over the next 12 months is actually to finish up Before You Buy That Building is my next book, and then there's going to be Before You Sell That Building, and it talks about the comprehensive process of doing all three of those processes. But that's essentially the premise. And especially if you're a startup, a lot of times, if you get into a bad lease, it could really cripple your business from a cash flow perspective. And that's what I want to help people try to avoid. And so that was the premise of writing the book. I'd written several books before that as well, so I have a process down for writing books. And it can be a very effective strategy for business development, especially if you incorporate that business, that book into sending it to strategic partners, or if you meet with a prospect and you get their business card, sending them a signed copy of the book afterwards, after your interaction. That could be it's a great way to be able to kind of establish yourself as that expert. So that's kind of my experience so far.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's definitely value in having a book and using a book as a modern day calling card, or a modern day business card. My apologies, but I want to peel that premise back on the before you sign that lease. So there's, as business owners and sales professionals, I own a couple businesses. I actually have my wife. We signed a business lease for her a year and a half ago. There's I have an audience right now that you have some salespreneurs, meaning they are highly successful 1099ers, or they have brokerages, insurance brokerages, real estate brokerages, and they also live in that commercial real estate space. Not like you, but they're clients and consumers. What mistakes should they avoid? Right? I think of my mom. She's a real estate agent, and I look at her firm and I say, "Okay, we're gonna go find a new place. We want the most beautiful, eclectic place in West Side LA, and it looks amazing." What mistakes should a business owner avoid when signing a new commercial real estate space?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, determine whether or not you even need a space, because sometimes people like the idea of having a space as like legitimizing their business, but in reality, it may or may not be necessary. So, sometimes I've sat down with people that maybe run you run a catering business or something, or you run a personal training business or something like that. In a lot of those instances, you may or may not need to sign a long-term lease. In a catering situation, you may be able to use like a ghost kitchen. You may not have to sign up for a 3 or 5 year lease, because that is a commitment that you're taking on for a long period of time. So first off, determining whether or not you actually need a lease is the big thing. And then from there, one of the biggest things that I see a lot of people mistakes that I'll see a lot of people make is they have assumptions as far as what commercial leases are. And that's really just drawing from experiences from a residential perspective. There's different types of commercial leases. There's triple net leases, there's gross leases, there's all these different types of leases that are available out there, and they all mean different things. So like triple net leases incorporate, insurance and taxes and general maintenance of the property. So you as the tenant are responsible for those expenses. And so if you see a base rent of, let's say, $2,000 a month, that's just the base rent. Now you got to calculate your tax expenditures, your insurance expenditures, and then factor in a little bit of an allowance for general maintenance. And so your monthly cash outflow may not be $2,000, maybe it's $3,000 or $3,500, but you wouldn't know that unless you carefully read the lease and interpret what's actually happening. And then the last thing I'd say, which is something that I've seen a lot of, and it's unfortunate, is passing along the expenses of major systems within a building to the tenant. Landlords try to do that a lot. So, for example, you may see a lease where the landlord's responsible for all repairs up to $250, and then after that, it's like the tenants. But if you're talking about a major system within your space, if your furnace and AC goes out, you're talking maybe $8,000 or $10,000. And if you're a startup, that's catastrophic to your business. So, again, I think the biggest things that you can avoid from a leasing perspective is to carefully read the lease and have a real estate advisory team, have a real estate lawyer in your corner, have an effective and knowledgeable real estate agent that specializes in commercial real estate, because, there's some very competent residential agents out there that could probably handle some of those transactions. But when you start dealing with more sophisticated, leases, especially when you're talking about leasing space from like large corporations, they typically have lease templates that are very complex and elongated, and you just don't want to take the risk of, signing on the dotted line and then being responsible for something if something does happen that's bad. So
Yeah, having that team, having that environment around you is definitely going to help prevent you from hurting yourself. And you mentioned that capital. we've all been there, right? And if you are a salespreneur right now, your capital is completely commission driven. The last thing you want to do is hunker down and pay for a $10,000 mistake or $5,000 mistake or $50,000 mistake because you didn't read a lease correctly. And I like how you said that. Do you really need that space? Because I have met and consulted salespreneurs that are like, oh, I want that space. And because they want to, like you said, legitimize their business. There's other ways to do it. There's virtual offices. There's ways to have that address and have that presence. But when you sign and commit to something, I mean, I work out of my home, and my home office, have had a home office for 10 years. And every time I've gone out, I'm like, oh, I want a fancy office somewhere. And I'm like, no, I enjoy the systems I have in place. So let me flip gears on you. So commercial real estate, I'm assuming you have competition in your space. Someone's listening right now and saying, okay, Raphael, I get what you're doing. I get you're educating people, but with all honesty, how do I separate myself as a new commercial real estate agent amongst my competition? How do I compete when I'm not, you mentioned something that I love. You said, right, I'm younger. My prospects are typically a little bit older than me, a little more savvy, been around the block, no business. And people view that as a hang up, like, I can't execute. And you didn't say that. So what do you have to say to that new commercial real estate agent that wants to succeed, that wants to compete, and just can't break through the door, or is struggling with their own limiting beliefs?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is, I mean, just start producing something, because you gain confidence from doing. So I feel like a lot of people just get hung up in these limiting beliefs, but the remedy to the limiting belief is action, is consistency. So I would recommend just starting off, maybe documenting your learning experience. I every Monday I release a video called "Frequently Asked Questions for Commercial Real Estate," and so what it is like, I address a question. Like last week, I think I did one on the difference between rentable and usable square footage. Like that's very easy to research. You could do a little bit of research and say, okay, what's the difference between usable and rentable square footage? And then you just act like you're sitting across the table from someone and just answer the question. And this is a unique experience for you as a newer agent as well, because now you get to learn about the industry. So as you're reading these industry publications, as you're taking these classes, just document some of the things about that you're learning, and then consider creating some sort of content associated with that. Or you can even incorporate some of the routes that I've seen others take, which is vlogging. So like, as you're going about your day, you say, okay, well, today I'm going to, prospect this particular individual, or I'm going to door knock in this area. And then you talk about what your experience is doing that. At the end, you kind of summarize some of the things that you've done, and some of the actions you've taken, and some of the successes you achieved. And then that could be great content you produce as well. And you'd be surprised with the response you get from people. And not only that, but I'll say this, is that there's not a lot of people producing content on a consistent basis. Like you said earlier, it's very common for people to just do it for 2-3 weeks and kind of let it go. In my space here in this market, is from a commercial real estate standpoint, there's almost no one doing it. So if you could be the 1, 2, or even top 10 people in your market, if it's large enough, doing it, you're going to get business from it. You're going to get people who recognize who you are. And as you're going out and about and doing all the different activities outside of just marketing yourself, it's going to pay huge dividends down the line. And it's going to build your confidence. So,
yeah, in being that 1, 2, 5, or 10, or wherever you are, I I love how you said, right, it's do something and be consistent. It goes to that old saying by Tony Robbins, right? People overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 10 years. I would tell, if you and I were working together and you were with me, Raphael, and you're like, hey man, I'm struggling with this, I would tell you, Raphael, if you're doing this career for 1 year, then yeah, man, you should be nervous, right? Your first 3 months of post, 25% of your time, kind of shitty, no one follows you, no one got engaged with you, you're struggling. But if you're telling me, hey man, I'm making this a career, I look at it like, dude, if in 6 years from now, you want to have the problem where your calendar is completely booked up and now you have a minimum threshold before you even work with somebody, that's going to start now with the 400 weekly blogs you're going to put out between now and that time. And when you put perspective and you look at your career on the longer vision, You're like, oh, it's just a small glimpse to remain consistent. So to tell that new agent to get out there, create something, I think that's such valuable feedback and advice. One of the things I'm curious on, Raphael, is sales professionals. It's a mental game, right? We're some months we're really good, some months we're really bad. Sometimes I feel like I'm the best salesperson in the world. Sometimes I feel like I'm the worst salesperson in the world. How do you keep yourself motivated, inspired? Do you have a mastermind you work with? Do you have a personal coach you work with? What is your like personal development habits today? And I know you mentioned you had a personal development blog many years ago, but as of today, 2021, going into 2022, what are you doing right now to keep your mind sharp and keep yourself motivated, inspired to produce and perform at your best?
Yeah, so I think, again, it kind of lends itself to consistency, but I think it's establishing routines. So, I read the book The Miracle Morning several years ago, and that kind of changed my perspective on how I approach my day-to-day operations. I wake up at the same time in the morning, I work out, I start my day to write, because that's one of the things that's how I've been able to write 5 books in the last 4.5, 5 years, is because I write every day. And then I incorporate some sort of other LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever my day calls for. And then, those are some wins for the day, because even if you have a terrible day the rest of the day, you get rejected all day, or it's just not a very productive day. Maybe you just can't get yourself to go, but you still had those morning wins, and those build on top of each other. And, I'll even say one of the best books I ever read in my life that kind of changed my trajectory was the book called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, where he talks about, those small, consistent actions every day adding up to big results. And one of the examples he used is, let's say you drink a Coke every day at lunch, but you decide to remove it from your diet. That's like 200 or 150 calories a day, and a pound is like 3,500 calories. So over the course of 22 days, now you've lost a pound of fat just by removing that one thing, and that's a positive characteristic. And over the course of a year, that can add up to 20 pounds. And what happens when you lose 20 pounds? You have more energy. So now maybe you start incorporating some other positive habits, right? And by year 5, you work out 4 times a week. You're running a marathon. But it all builds on top of each other. And that's through the morning routine. That's through consistent action. And yes, you're going to have some bad days, but just reference the calendar. Just stick to your calendar and say, okay, today I'm going to do this in the morning, and then whatever happens the rest of the day is great, but you already have your wins for the day right in the morning.
You referenced some amazing books there. I'm a big fan of Miracle Morning and Hal Elrod, so I think that book is groundbreaking. Everybody should read it at a given point in time. I didn't read the second book you recommended, but it reminded me a lot of a book I just finished reading, Atomic Habits, where the small changes go in the right step, and having that ability to say, I'm gonna make these small incremental changes. I love the consistency method you implement. Being a creature of habit, right? It's in your if it's in your daily process, it becomes in your sales process, becomes in your business. That habitual thing gives you an opportunity to create repetition, but create evaluation. I look at it in the aspect of the habit you just outlined. Like if I'm having a bad sales month, and I look at the habits you just outlined, and I'm like, if I'm working with you and you're like, I'm having a bad sales month, I'm like, Raphael, what have you stuck to your habits? Have you stuck to your routine? And typically, I know for me personally, when I break habits, it drives me crazy. Fun fact, like this morning, I didn't go work out because I got home late from Monday Night Football, super late, because it took forever to get out of SoFi Stadium in LA. And I woke up this morning, and the first thing I told my wife, I was like, man, I'm angry I didn't work out. And it was like 5:30, and I was supposed to be up by 5 a.m. to go work out. And I had a full day starting at 6:15, and I was like, ugh. We'll pick that up at the tail end of the day. But I get that. You said something here that I don't think enough people recognize or acknowledge. You're winning in the morning. Like you're making your success take place first thing in the morning to set that mood for the remainder of the day. Is that something that is by design? Is that something because your habit? But I mean, I know you have the habit, but you're like actually creating victories and feeling good about the productivity all before 8, 9, 10 in the morning. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, exactly. And the logic there is the reason why I like the mornings the best is because you're wide awake, right? Especially if you have some coffee, you have a lot of energy, and people usually aren't up that early anyways. So you're not going to have a lot of demands on your time. we're all busy sales professionals, so after 8:30, it's a crapshoot. I mean, especially if you have you have to go here, there, maybe you have showings if you're in real estate, or you have to meet with prospective clients. Like, there's other things that happen throughout the day that can impede your ability to get those early wins. So that was the logic for the early morning routines. And obviously, as you mentioned, Hal Elrod's book was kind of instrumental in me saying, okay, well, this is what I got to do. And so that's what I've been doing for the last several years.
Fair enough. Well, Raphael, I appreciate the insights there. I'd love to give you a quick minute or two here. Can you let the Catapulting Commissions family know how they get connected with you? What's the social media, the books, the YouTube? Someone's listening and says, hey, I want to learn more about the commercial real estate journey. How do they find you?
Yeah, sure. So, you can find me via my website at Raphael, Raphael, Collazo, COLLAZO.com. I also have a podcast called the Commercial Real Estate Academy Podcast, where we produce weekly podcast episodes pertaining to commercial real estate topics. My YouTube channel, you just search my name, you can find it. And I'm super active on LinkedIn, so if you want to reach out to me via there and ask any questions, I'd be happy to kind of engage with that. And yeah, those are probably the easiest ways to get in contact with me.
Perfect. Raphael Collazo. I will have all those links for Raphael, his website, his LinkedIn profile will all be in the show notes. Catapulting Commissions family, do me a favor. Go get connected with Raphael on LinkedIn. Follow his content. Learn from him. I can guarantee you the consistency he puts out, you're going to appreciate. We want to continue to learn and grow, and that's what we do on the Catapulting Commission Show. We bring people that we can learn and grow from. Raphael fits right in line with the amazing group of guests we've had. So, Raphael, thank you for joining the show. Catapulting Commissions family, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, and I will see you next week.